when people outside of games, and also runs this occasionally within games too, but when they make broad claims about the intention of the developers or what they intended to do, and like they did this for this reason, and I'm like, it's probably wrong. It's probably for a technical reason. It's probably for scope. It's probably because like you got to ship the game in 1 month, and here are the bugs that you have to fix, or here are the features that you can polish and the other features that you can't polish, right?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Game Developer Podcast. I'm your host, Senior Editor Bryant Francis. At PAX East this year, I was chatting to the developers behind Cyberlich, Death Cult of Labor, and one of them asked me a surprising question. Have you heard of the door problem? He was asking about a blog written by Era Softworks design director Liz England, back when she was a game designer at Insomniac Games. And yeah, I know about the door problem. Not only did I read it in 2014, Liz cross-posted it onto what was then the Gamma Sutra blog system that same year. It still shows up on our traffic metrics as people read it a decade later on Game Developer. I'm also lucky enough to know Liz personally. Back in 2014, she agreed to meet up with me at a board game cafe in Glendale, California, to answer my questions about getting into the game industry after we'd been speaking on Twitter. 11 years later, we're still shitposting about games, movies, capital D discourse, just over on Blue Sky. Fewer Nazis. Liz is today's guest on the Game Developer Podcast. That means in theory I should be asking her immediately for insights on game design and her career, but first we have a far more important question in need of answering. Hey Liz, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, Liz, tell me about the number one crime that I see in your video background there. For audio listeners, Liz has a bookshelf where the books are organized by color and not by author or title. Liz, I regret to inform you that I'm sending the book police your way as they speak. They'll be here by the end of the podcast recording so we can finish this. But yeah, what's this crime? Why have you done this crime against humanity?
So one of my favorite things for people who know me well enough, and you and I have talked, so this should not be a surprise at all to you either.
Nothing surprises me about you anymore.
Is I love it when people get irritated by things that don't matter, and I can't help but like irritate them a little bit more about it. So like for one, like color order books are like quite pretty, right? And I like actually like rainbow theming. I have a very colorful apartment, and the books are well suited with that. But as soon as I found out that people got irritated and they got really mad about people who organize books in color order, I was like, oh, I know what I need to do. So I don't know if you can tell that both of my bookshelves are in color order. Mm-hmm. I've had questions from people like, what do you do about like a book series, right? Like, do you not keep the books together? And the answer is no, I split them up by color, right? And it bothers people like even more when I say that. I have a pretty good like visual memory, so I'm like looking for a book. It's like, all right, well, what color is the binder? And I'm like, most of the time I get it right, and then sometimes I'm like, I have no clue. Let me just look at all the books. Mm-hmm. But I love it that people are irritated by it. They're bothered by it. Like some people claim that people who organize books by color do not read, and like don't use them as reference or anything like that. And I'm just like, I don't care. I care more that you're bothered by it. And so yeah, that's the origin story of organizing books by color. This is actually very deliberate for the book police.
Yeah. You invite the book police, and I assume you've laced your apartment with booby traps for when they arrive. Like, say, like books just like their spines broken and stuff are just lying around your apartment.
Oh, I write in my books too, and I highlight in them. Like sometimes I'll lend out a book and someone's horrified because they have all these like little marginalia notes for me.
Yeah.
And that's a book crime for sure. I dog ear books as well.
Oh,
I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of books should be used, and they're like, you just use them, right?
Yeah.
I don't need to keep them in pristine condition.
Yeah, that's fair. As someone who does read the books that are on my shelf, like, I think the dog earring was the biggest crime, if only because like, I think that makes the book harder to read later if you ever want to go back to it, because maybe the fold of the page is there, and you're like, wait, was I actually here, or is this a past me's like dog ear?
I use real. I have real bookmarks. Oh well, not real bookmarks. I have index cards or the latest receipt as a bookmark, so I know where I am. But yeah, I do like my books feeling used.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm used to like, I've bought a lot of books used, right? And it's like, I don't care. Is it readable? Does it close well? That's fine. It's all good.
The what's a good book you're reading lately? Like, is it nonfiction,
Oh,
fiction? What's really like what are you actually reading and not just doing book
um,
crimes too?
hold on. I got to remember the name of it. I don't know if it's good. Here's the problem. It's like I'll read something. This is the same with games. Like
Hmm.
I'm looking for something that's like a novel experience I haven't had, or there's the kind of experience I'm looking for. I'll ask for a bunch of recommendations, and then I'll play the game or I'll read the book, right? And right now, I was like, I like horror, right? But I don't read a lot of horror. And I was asking some friends, and they recommend that I actually read some Clive Barker. But I
Oh
actually
yeah, yeah,
haven't read
yeah.
anything by him, and so I'm currently reading the. Give me the name of the book. The Great and Secret Show. Um, I don't know if it's good, but it is a wild ride. And there's like a texture with how he writes that I'm like, this. I've never really read anything quite like this before, and I'm like, well, that's a good experience. I don't know if I'll recommend the book by the time I finish reading it, but like. It does some things that I've really never really seen an author do in terms of like this plot is now lasted like the main characters have changed significantly and the location has changed significantly, but it's still like the same story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. So I know you said you like horror, and we've talked a few times about like you are also obsessed with bad horror movies. Can you sort of tell me? I think an interesting thing about when we're telling people, I don't know, like designers and creative people in games get told like, oh, try everything, experience anything, go outside your comfort zone.
Yeah.
And there's like a nudge towards like, you know, hey, check out these high quality things or these standards or like go look for these independent artists. And sometimes you get the message, hey, go check out some trash. But like, I don't think it's a top level message that you hear a lot. So like, but you are clear, you have told me before, I love trash. And horror, these are trashy horror movies. Like, tell me about
Oh, yeah.
why you love them, I guess.
So I love all right, and I do want to like preface it with like I actually do love really good horror.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
my interests are very niche, and so I like tend to not like when I watch horror and I watch something that I think is really good, it's usually a film that makes you feel really horrible inside. And so they're not good films to recommend to other people unless they want to watch that kind of media. Like it's not like you're gonna have a great time watching this film. Like no, by the end of it, you're gonna like question humanity and be like, wow, I just feel kind of like dead and emotionless inside. And I love that, but most people don't. But when it comes to horror, like I'll watch a lot of different genres. Horror is my favorite genre, and I will watch anything and everything of all ranges of good to bad. There's something about bad horror that I find really endearing. Like I don't know how else to describe it. Like a lot of bad horror when it's like there's a good bad horror is earnestly made,
Yeah.
right? Like they actually want to make a horror film. They're going to have fun making this film. They kind of know that it's bad. And there's like an earnestness towards like the making of it. And often when I watch these films, I'll take a step back and ask myself, wow, it's got to be wild being those actors in the scene. Like, who wrote this script and handed it to people who are acting out so earnestly this script, right? And I
Yeah.
imagine there's like a lot of fun behind the creation of the film. And so when I watch a lot of bad movies, I'm often taking the step back of like imagining the creation of this like artistic product and like what that experience of creating this is. And I think that happens a lot when I play a lot of the weirder niche indie games, right? Where I'm like, how did this get made? Like, there's a certain term I tend to use for some games lovingly, where I say, this game has never been focus tested. And what I
Yeah.
mean is like all the creative, like whatever is rattling around in the creator or creators' brains is still in the game and has not been removed. And I like that about bad horror movies when you can sort of like see that out of those.
Yeah.
One of the other things I love, and this is very religious-y games, one of my favorite sub genres of horror is horror that's about games. So like fictional games, like I'll watch any movie that's about a fictional game or fictional VR or like game developers. I'm just like so fascinated by how these are presented in media, right? But so many of them are horror because there's so much like I think it's just fun subject to make a horror film about is like a haunted video game or a haunted board game or some like folk game. And there's so many of these and they make for a good like setting for a horror movie, but often these games are really bad games. And so I love watching these films because they're bad horror films. And I do love good, bad horror trash, however we want to put it. right? But I love them even more when it's like, and there's a board game that they invented for this. They named it. There's some kind of game rules that the players have to follow, and if they don't follow, they all die, right? And often it's like trying to express some kind, like some of the more serious ones in this genre are expressing some kind of like insecure, or like it's not insecurity, but it's like some sort of like thoughts about the role of games in society as a negative force. And so like there's trends you see, and it's like, okay, is this one about how you can't tell reality from a video game? Because that's like one of the most popular ones, right? So anyway, I love that particular niche of a niche of a niche of horror. I have a spreadsheet of them, which also shouldn't surprise anyone who knows me.
We're going to come back to your spreadsheets and we will. I think like something I love about like horror ranging from like high level or range. Let's say at the top end you have The Monkey, which was adapted from the Stephen King novel that came out earlier last year. I think it was earlier this year. Like great movie. And then somewhere down the middle, there's Clown in a Cornfield that I watched that I was like, this is like, there's a couple fun kills. And then way down to the bottom are sort of this type of horror movie you're talking, like super low budget, like just trying to kind of put the piece together. And something that's kind of super fun to me is that this genre, like especially the lower budget you go, is like these movies are kind of inviting you to figure out how they not how they did it, like the mystery of order, but how they did it, how they made an effect, how they made a kill. Like I watch these things and I sort of go, it's not just that I'm having fun trying to figure out, but because like the artifice is either for budget reasons or just creative reasons, like so like not there. Like it's fun to watch like Psycho Gorman, and there's just like you see like the liquid spewing out of something and you're like, there's a hose on the other end of that, but because it's so like over the top, like you don't mind. It's better than just watching a hose of goo or something.
Yeah. And like I think one of the things I like in films in general, and like I seek out a lot of like indie or art house films that do this regardless of genre, is I like a bottle episode. I like a film that it's like the setting is a room. The setting is this very small contained space, and it tends to be very character oriented. And so one of my favorite films are actually like more in the thriller genre, or like you're trapped at like, I don't know, when we talk about games, it's like various escape room. How do you escape this room? Only one of you will survive. I love that sort of stuff, and that's like the trash version of it. And when you get to low-budget horror, a lot of really low-budget horror is you're stuck in a room because it's cheap. It's really cheap to have a film that's like you're only in a room and there's actually only two actors, and they're going to write a whole drama about it. And it's not going to be great, right? Or sometimes it's like, I would say sometimes it surpasses perhaps their budget or like the skill of like maybe the people making it. And it's like, it's more than like the sum of its parts. But I love bottle episodes, and I love that sort of contained space because I'm like, all right, you created yourself some constraints for this film. How are you going to like do some like wild thing in such a small space?
Yeah, constraints are like this thing that I don't know. Oh, it's weird. We say like design, like, you know, genre offers constraints, like your tools offer constraints. Like we do talk about constraints and when we're talking about game design and game development, but like I think there's a benefit to like trying to go like look at something else and trying to figure out what the constraints were there. Like the first moment I ever thought about constraints as like a creative person was I took an art history 101 class when I was in college, and the sort of one of the basic examples was like, you know, infamously, like we say like purple is a royal color because it was purple used to be expensive for like dye and for painting, so it was generally used for royalty to symbolize royalty, whatever. But then deeper down below that is not just, well, why was it expensive, is like the question that generates up, and then suddenly you have this huge explosion of like, I'm forgetting the specific materials or whatever, you know, like it's hard to gather those, it's hard to like process them, and then the second, you know, like some other new form of like generating like, you know, purple thread or purple paint came along, you know, like the significance carried over. And like constraints literally sometimes go down to like, you know, the flow of water shapes the form of a river is something that I think about a lot in my head. And like I think it's like, sometimes I think that's like so obvious, or I love going to look for it myself, but also sometimes then I sort of see people not pay attention to that. And sometimes I think, especially if you're not working on games or you haven't worked on a game, you can make assumptions about a game in a way that like, Sometimes it's positive, players, like I play tabletop games with people and they'll will shoot the shit about like, oh, what could be done to make this game better? And they often propose something kind of complicated. And I'm sitting here going like, oh, but they can't do that because like the amount of cards they can print, such and such. And sometimes I think it's hard to bridge the gap, with people where like, not just like, oh, things are hard in games, but oh, like the physical constraints.
Yeah.
And sometimes those things are behind NDA too, which makes it even harder.
Yes. It's funny, right? Like to some extent, I don't think players or even games critics should necessarily care about the constraints that developers under when they're building a game. Like, yeah. I am totally fine for them to evaluate the game as a artistic artifact or as a product or as like, well, however you want to like picture that on its own, and how it stands. But I, as a developer, am super interested in the constraints. So, like, whenever I play a game, I'm often thinking about, like some of my favorite games are, like, solid 7 out of 10s, right? They are really interesting. They do something new. I don't know if it's kind of like the book that I'm reading. Like, I don't know if this is a good book, but it's doing something for me, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of games that I like are like, this is wild and weird, and it's doing something new, and it's not perfect. And so I go through the exercise, I think, like all designers do, of like, why is it not perfect? What are the problems with it? What would I do that's different? But when I think about that, when I go through that mental exercise, I'm often thinking about, okay, what experiences do the developers have? What tools are they using? What constraints are they under, like time and budget, right? Like, I play a lot of, I'll say, like, lower budget indie games, and there's, like, a version of those games that I'm like, oh, I know how I would polish this. I know how I would tune and tweak this. I know, like, there's things about, like, the game feel here that's just awkward. The animations are incomplete. But a game is good, but it's, like, it lacks being great because it's missing some of these things that just help with that moment-to-moment feel. Mm-hmm. But, like... Okay, but what I'm describing is like in a completely different development environment with which to make that game. And if that's the only way you make that game, we don't get the one that I had in my hands, right? Yeah. Like I would never be able to play like one of my favorite games of the last couple of years that I put in this category, and I say this lovingly, like I really enjoy this game, is Planet Crafter. It's got such a good design. It's got such a smart, like, combination of a build survive game with terraforming a planet. So you actually have an idle game that's happening in the background, right? Like, over time, your oxygen is ticking up. Over time, the pressure on the planet's ticking up. But to do that, you have to, like, build and place. Sorry, everyone's going to have to hear me talk about Planet Crafter. No. I love Planet Crafter. You are placing, like, equipment and machinery in the world in order to increase the pressure, increase the heat, increase the oxygen. At some point, your meter, your idle game meter will say, all right, we are 1% of the way towards rain, right? Weather. And I'm like, okay, great. I can't wait for rain. So I'm going to continue like placing all these things. And we get rain, then you get lakes, then you start getting plants. But some of the things that you're placing go from like industrial machinery to I'm placing flowers. I'm placing a thing that's going to place flowers in this field. I'm placing a butterfly farm, and you're actually decorating the planet. And so it's such a smart idea. It's so like there's just like a spark of brilliance, I think, there from a game design standpoint. The implementation of it is sort of like this rough kind of it's got rough edges. It's got a lot of rough edges, right? Like it's very Subnautica-like, but Subnautica is where all those rough edges have been cleaned up, and it is like a masterpiece. And I'm like, Planet Crafter could be a masterpiece, but it just fails in some like specific ways. But if I held it to that standard, then I wouldn't get this game, right? Yeah. And so I tend to be very forgiving, probably because I'm a developer, about like games that are like imperfectly made, because if I didn't get this imperfectly made game, I just wouldn't be able to get that game. And I don't know, it's not about quality versus quantity or anything like that, but I think you get the idea, right?
Yeah, very much so. It's something that I get a little sad when I'm out in the wild, talking to people who either don't work in games or don't work in like media at all, and they will sort of talk shit about games, like a kind of game, a genre, a format, and I have to like strike that balance between like not just telling them, oh, well, I work in games, I know how this works, and just kind of going like, but then also a part of me can be sincerely disappointed, like sort of hearing someone like not just kind of sometimes it's this range of like they're talking about a bad experience they had and it's very valid, or they're just sort of they had an okay experience and they're repeating sort of like internet meme about a game, right? Like oh, such and such game is dog shit. Well, you played 200 hours of it or something. Like that's a little dispiriting sometimes, but it's also like you said, like players are not obligated to know anything about how games are made. They should feel free to have whatever opinions they want. So attention.
It's when I think when I draw the line is when people outside of games, and also runs this occasionally within games too, but when they make broad claims about the intention of the developers or what they intended to do, and like they did this for this reason, and I'm like, it's probably wrong. It's probably for a technical reason. It's probably for scope. It's probably because like you got to ship the game in 1 month, and here are the bugs that you have to fix, or here are the features that you can polish and the other features that you can't polish, right? Like it's probably very practical considerations. But I do find that a lot of people make like broad claims about what development was like or team dynamic, like especially when you look at some of the like YouTubers that make their living or their reputation off of telling players how it is in game development without necessarily being game developers themselves or not being on those teams. There's like a lot of wild claims, and usually it's like a much more boring answer, right? But I think people get excited by the like more dramatic answers, and like just saying like, yeah, we had 3 features we needed to polish and only time for 1, so this is the one we picked, is not like an interesting story for people. And so And so you can make up stories about like why things are the way they are. And I, as a developer, will make up stories as well, because I'm trying to like tease apart when I'm playing a game, but I'm doing it with dev goggles, and then I'm not making a YouTube video about it. I am doing a podcast where I did say like Planet Crafter just failed in some ways, but it's a fantastic game. Everyone should buy it. So I'm offsetting that a little bit, but
I'll go check it afterward. It's funny because it's a kind of conspiracism, right? Like conspiracy theory is fundamentally like the world is scary and awful. There's something big and like frustrating in front of me in my life, maybe, and it's my brain can handle the idea of like someone is doing something deliberately and out to get to me versus the more complex series of failures that can lead to a state like that. But then the problem is sometimes people do act with that malevolence, and at least on like, you know, very big level things, that's like where things get frustratingly hard, right? Like I'm going to avoid diving too deep there, but it's something I've personally been like fascinated by, especially when you use conspiracism and people's like justified skepticism to, you know, exploit them effectively, most times for money, sometimes to hurt other people. And that interests me. I think I'll confess and share a story here, which is when I was in high school, I played World of Warcraft. I played a paladin class, and I don't know to what extent this is still true or was true, or if it changed and changed again. But at the time, the paladin class was designed as a hybrid class. In theory, it had talent trees for attracting enemy attention and taking damage, healing, and in theory, it had a damage tree. Damage tree was not useful in the player PvE environment, like players versus, you know, monsters and stuff. It was more spike driven damage for PvP, but here I am 14, 15 years old. I don't understand that. I do want to role play as this character, you know, that is both like healer and harmer. You know, like that's kind of where I'm at. And so when I join a guild, I'm like, oh sweet, I'm going to go be PvP, do damage. And they're like, nah, go respec for healing. Like if you want to come get the sweet loot, like you gotta you know, paladins are optimized for healing in this environment, so we're gonna do that. And for a long time I thought, and I may have been Jeff Kaplan, and I may have the developer who I thought was wrong, but I straight up like thought that there was like one developer who they hired from EverQuest who had, because they hated paladins in EverQuest for some reason, they hated paladins here and were deliberately nerfing them. And then like this was in high school. Within a few years of that, I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Like before I even got into games.
No. Yeah.
And today I both feel a deep shame about it, and also it gives me, you know, like I guess empathy for people who feel similarly about video games.
Yeah. I mean, I think games are in this weird spot where it's like they create fandoms, and also your community can come out of a game. So it's not just like you're a fan of something like World of Warcraft. Your community, your friends, people that like you create lifelong friendships might have come out of some of these games. So you have a really strong emotional attachment to these games. And like I want to make games that are like games that are art, right? Like all games are art, but like I want to always make better games, and I always want to make interesting games.
Yeah.
And I don't always succeed, but we'll see. Like I'm always trying something different with these things. And so like if players have a strong emotional experience to a game that I've made, like that's a huge success. But that emotional attachment does come with it. Like I don't want to be like entitlements, right? Because it's not like you're entitled to something to feel this way. I think it's normal to feel something about like. In the same way, okay, I'm going to use a slightly political, this should be non-controversial example, which is like the emotional reaction I had when I had to finally leave Twitter, right? And then eventually join Blue Sky, right? Like it's like this is a place where I formed a community, and I used this platform, regardless of whether the platform was good or not. I created a community here. And like I have a lot of emotional reaction to having to leave that, or like the diaspora of that community off to other places, and like how am I going to create that community again? How am I going to find new devs that are up and coming? Because that's a lot of like what I use something like Twitter for. And that meant like, sure, I don't know if I was engaging in conspiratorial, because I think all my conspiracy theories were correct. A few cases where that is true, right? But like I often associate it with stuff like that, where it's like, I understand why some players have really strong emotional experiences with the games they play, because so much their communities come out of it. And there are a lot of like, I'll say biases, and I don't mean that in like I mean that in like a more psychological, like biases about how people talk about a game and how they feel about a game based off of like the meta commentary about a game, right? Has a big effect. There's a great talk from GDC from several years ago called I can't remember it now. I'll send you the name of it. I can remember. It's part of the series, and it was the last one that the developer did of the series. And it was all on a number of psychological. It was things like hindsight bias, right? Is a really good example, and how people use sort of like cosmetics in games to show off, and how that creates sort of like a distancing between the people who have cosmetics and show off and the people who don't, and just like a lot of things that are psychological about how people in groups interact, and how that may apply to your multiplayer environment to create different kind of dynamics out of players that maybe you don't want if you're trying to create a cooperative and non-toxic environment, but adding things like paid for cosmetics where it's like I can do the show off and now I'm better than you, and then you start creating reasons about why you deserve it that kind of affects the multiplayer experience for players and just like how the community interacts. And one of the things I always think about is the meta, right? Because players will come up with a meta for a game, right? Like
meta being most efficient tactical advantage. I forget what the A is.
I don't even know that it isn't. Is it actually? I didn't know.
It is, oh, it is. Yeah, I've learned it playing war games. I
did not know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I just considered it like meta and like metafictional, right? Like it's a good use of talking about it. But like for them, it's like things like, you don't PvP with a paladin. That's just inept, right? And one of the interesting things about like those sort of things is that players will come up with rules and then they can post hoc justify, right? Why you failed in this match is because of the meta. Even if the meta isn't right, it's wrong. You have all kinds of biases that come out of that, and it's like it's very hard to like break players out of it. Alex Jaffe actually did a really good talk also at GDC several years ago. When we had an esports summit. It's like a 25-minute talk, and I can't remember the name of it, but it was basically about the meta of the meta, and he did like a bunch of data analysis of not just the meta for a brawler game, but also like how that meta changed over time as a way to analyze like player behavior and how they flocked to certain characters after certain changes, and it was really fascinating. A little off topic, but I think about those sort of things because, like, as an individual, you feel like you're in a lot of control about your thoughts about a game and your opinions about it. But I'm like, we live in a society. We're highly influenced by everyone else, right? And so, like, you get all kinds of echo chambers. You get some people that have a strong, confident statement, and other people are like, oh yeah, no, they're strong and they're confident about it, and I also agree. And then it kind of comes the rule, and it's like, oh, it's sometimes subtly wrong, sometimes extremely wrong. And how do you unpack that? And I don't know that you can always battle that, right?
Yeah. Sometimes you just have to let people be mad about, say, the green bubbles, like from iPhone to Android, the bubble thing, which I was like, why do we care about this? Like, to the point that, like, senators were saying, like, we should be looking into this. And I'm like, does this matter? Does this matter?
I love it when people get mad about things that don't matter, though. Every time someone, I think, what is it, the latest, again, off topic, but my brain can't stay on topic. People started talking about friend swap, and I'm like, oh, this is a great term. In part because people hate the term. Metroidbrania was a term that I've been using for a long time. There's a whole subreddit for Metroidbranias, and they recommend a bunch of games that I love, because I love Metroidvania-style games that do not have, preferably not precision platforming or combat-oriented. I want them to be puzzle-oriented, and I'm like, this is a great genre. Everyone got mad about the term, and I'm like, this is now part of my regular lexicon in a way that it never has been before. Yes.
Every time people are mildly irritated about a cultural thing, you're like, I grow more powerful.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It brings me joy.
Speaking of, I don't even know what we're speaking of anymore. I've been trying to build a segue for 5 minutes, and this isn't your fault. This is my lack of creativity. I had a great time at PAX East this year. If for listeners who really want to like dig into my thoughts about being at PAX East, like go look up my story about the air quotes deprofessionalization of games. If you haven't read it already, you might get mad at me afterwards. I don't know. I had a lot of angry messages. But speaking of things that are on GameDeveloper.com, a long time ago, you wrote a blog called The Door Problem. And I had a recent reason at PAX East to be thinking about it, because I was interviewing these young devs behind a game called Cyberlich Death Cult of Labor. Really cool looking game. I think folks should go check it out. And I was just doing a quick interview with them, sort of trying to pick their brain about some stuff. And one of them was like, oh, you should look up this thing called The Door Problem. And 1, I felt old because I was like, oh shit, I first read that 10 years ago. And 2, I was like, oh, well, I know Liz. And 3, I was like, well, that's on my site. Like, of course I know The Door Problem. But for listeners who haven't read your blog from ages ago about The Door Problem, can you quickly run through like what it is and what was going in your head when you first wrote it?
Okay, so the door problem is, it's going to be very funny when I tell you, like, here's how it came to be. It's going to be very anticlimactic. So the door problem is an article I wrote more than 10 years ago. I wrote it in 2014, which is a very long time ago.
I don't like it.
I wrote it like a couple weeks after GDC as well, and I'll get to that in a moment. Like, that was the origin of, like, I should write this. And it's just a short, I'd actually say, from my point of view, it was just a throwaway post that is just like, great. That was just saying, like, hey, when I talk to other people about what game design is, because game design specifically, people are like, well, what is it? Because it's not, like, when you talk about a designer in other industries, there's product designers, there's graphic design. Often people think graphic design, and I'm like, it's not either of those. And when they think about games jobs, they think about programming and they think about art, and they don't tend to think about any of the other things. And if I said I was like an audio designer, people would understand, even though they don't know the technicalities, they kind of understand, oh, you do with like music and sound effects. Like, people understand that. But people don't really have a concept of what a game designer is. So I used the door problem to kind of explain. I was like, look, here's what a game designer does. You know, you have a thing in the game that you are interacting with, and you need to write up the spec, and you have to define the rules, and you have to do the implementation, and you have to answer all the questions about how this affects the player experience. Before I used the door problem, I used to use just Super Mario Brothers, and I still use that as a common example. I usually say, like, are you familiar with Mario? And a lot of people, even if you've never played a game, are familiar with Mario, little blubber that's jumping around. And I'm like, a designer does X, Y, and Z in this environment, and an animator does this, and a programmer does this, right? And like, Mario's a good case because you can just talk about a game that a lot of people can picture in their heads. But not everyone's played Mario, and some people actually like, this actually came from like a conversation I had with someone who tried to use the Mario example, and they were like, I don't really know much about like it or what it looks like. So I use an example of the door. And so I walk through like what a designer does in relation to a door, right? And I just use door because it is a common object that everyone who has existed in this planet in the last 1,000 years, I'm not going to say of all time, has experienced a door, right? And you often take it for granted that you can open it, you can close it, here's how it works, it has physics. When you try to walk through it, you can't. It stops you, right? And so, like, people who don't make games and don't work with technology in this way don't realize that none of that's free. You actually have to think about that from first principles. Like, we never have to think about in the world the fact that you go up to a door and it's going to stop you from walking, or you're going to shatter it, right? Or you're going to hit it, right? We don't think about that. We kind of take that for granted because we understand how the physics of the universe work in an instinctual way. You can't rely on those instincts anymore when you're making a game. It's like, you got to make gravity, right? Like, what is your gravity value for your game is actually a decision you have to make at some point. And so I used doors because it was very common for people not in games, right? And then I did a little analysis of, like, a designer's role is to ask all these questions about how the door works and or answer all these questions about how the door works, how you're supposed to interact with it, what its behavior is. And then I did like a little outline of, like, here's a bunch of different jobs and like how they might interface with a door. And it was meant to be comedic. It's not meant to be serious. I think some players who read this are like, man, I hate this guy, because I used something that was like monetization. I used like a funny little thing, and they were like, oh, the worst person, or the CEO, worst person in the world. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. These are just slightly comedic, right? And so I wrote up that article. I posted online. It went viral, which is a weird experience. But like, it went viral for the right reason, which is people enjoyed it, not because people hated it. My only death threat I have ever gotten in games career, which is a surprise, as being a woman who's very visible, I've only ever gotten one death threat, and it was an email about the door problem. Very funny to me, right? Like, I mean, it's not a serious one, but it's like, you should die, was like the statement I got. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe you have too much emotional connection to the games that you play. You should go
or doors. Route. Maybe they have a big emotional connection to doors.
Yeah. So I wrote that blog post, but like, so it has since been used in a lot of curriculums. It's been printed in a lot of books. Like, I get a lot of messages from people and like academics who are like, can I have permission to reprint? And I'm like, yes, here's my really basic rules. It's been translated to a bunch of languages. People have made posters for it for like conferences or for like student career fair sort of things to like teach people about it. It's somebody in Austria, I can't remember. The student asked permission, and later I found it. A student made like a interactive art exhibit. That was the door problem. That was a bunch of doors. I didn't get a chance to play it. I just was able to read a little bit about it, and it was very much like the Museum of Lockpicking, but for doors, I think. And use the door problem quoted around it. And I'm like, I'm glad that other people find this much value in a thing that I literally whipped up, because if you look at my blog, and if you look at the first thing ever posted, it's the door problem. And it's because I was like, man, I really need to publish my blog. I did all this work. I have like my portfolio work up here. I have my master's project up here. And I'd been in games for a number of years, but I'm like, I had done a whole revamp and I wanted to start blogging. And I think it was like the night before, a friend of mine suddenly posted online. It's like, hey, I started up a blog, and here's my first blog post. And I remember looking at that and being like, I can't believe you beat me to it. And like, they didn't know, but it was like some element of like competitiveness in my lizard brain that I was like, how dare you post your blog when I'm ready to post mine? And I'm like, well, I better just sit down and write this up, right? And so I wrote it up in like an hour. It was throwaway, and it was meant so that I could just like put my website online again. That's the whole purpose of it. So just it was throwaway. And I came to it after, again, like I was at GDC that year, like a couple weeks earlier than that, and I had been sitting down. I have some family in San Francisco, so I met up with one of them for dinner, and she was actually at she was having dinner with some of her coworkers, not in games at all, like in like the medical field, and they're all women, and invited me to dinner before we hung out, and I sat down with dinner with them, and they were asking me a bunch of questions about games, because they all associate games as a very masculine hobby and also for kids, right? And I'm explaining it, and one of the women in particular was like, she was asking me all kinds of questions, and that's where I used like the Mario example, and she didn't get it, but I used the door example, and she immediately got it. I'm like, okay, I've hit something here that worked. One of the things I do find kind of interesting side effect, I'm not going to steal it. I'm not going to like steal anyone's steal is not the right term, but like it's not wrong to do it this way, but like a lot of people, developers read it and they're like, yeah, you know what? Doors are hard. And I'm like, that's not what the article was. The article was never about how doors were hard to implement. Now, granted, doors are hard to implement in games. They are particularly gnarly. I just use them because they're a good example that everyone in the world has used. But it became the whole, like, doors are the worst, aren't they? And I'm like, okay, they are. You know, they are. But that wasn't the purpose of the article. So I think one of the reasons just that it became more popular in people's consciousness is because people have this like trauma around implementing doors. Yeah. Right? And I wasn't trying to like hinge on that trauma, but clearly that was the thing that made it more popular than I had intended.
Yeah. I sort of like actually like take deep meaning, and you're like, oh, it's anticlimactic. And I'm like, no, I think it's very significant when something that becomes so like common parlance that, you know, someone's explaining it to me at PAX East, even though I've already read it, that I think there is something very like it affects me at a very like deep level, like when I think about how creativity, any of these things that bind us together like work, is the idea that like this half dashed off thing, like suddenly, like, you know, like you sort of write it down and, you know, maybe in your head it sounded like a scribble, but in the, you know, for everyone around you, it sounded like a thunderclap, and it travels and travels and travels. And like, I think that like both, you know, that's we talked about emotional connections to games, but I think like even a blog like that, like you sort of did something that, you know, games do for a lot of people, which is like you did like strike this like emotional connection to people trying to understand it, to people who've done it, to people who now feel they can explain it to other people, to people who go, yeah, wow, man, doors suck. Like you sort of like, I think like that sort of goes back to the small boring things you talk about anyway. We're like, why is a game like this? Why are game designers like this? Why is this door problem such a big deal? And it's just like, oh, well, I just need to update my blog. But something deep down in you that was in other people was like ready to jump out. And I take a lot of meaning in that, like broadly. Like I'm tipping my hand about like my own creative instincts and feelings about the world, and I'm dodging the word spirituality because I'm afraid to say it. But I will, you know, I'll be a little vulnerable and say like things like this, like hit me at that level, and not to, again, I sort of don't want to put too much weight on it because you know, nobody, it's not a sacred text, it's just a blog, but at the same time, like it's just still like 10 years later, some early 20 something developer is sitting here explaining to me at PAX, and I'm just like, holy crap, like that's the line from half dashed up blog to there is just like, you know, that's profound in some way.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I think about a lot is the importance of having the language to describe a thing. And metaphors, and like that article that I wrote is an example of that. Having a way to describe a thing you're seeing, or a thing you're feeling, or a thing that you're doing, and not having good language for it, and then stumbling across someone who's able to develop some kind of language that clarifies it, right? And that's sort of like that serendipity that you run into occasionally, and it's like things that come to mind. Like there's an old blog post from around the same time, I want to say, that I think about often. And it was around the time where one of our favorite discourses was online, you know, in the don't be online, don't be on social media. It's just the same conversations over and over again. But this was all the, like, can games be art, right? Like, a lot of that conversation was happening, and there were people having back and forths about it. And one of my favorite articles at that time was just, I think it was an indie developer. I'd have to look up who wrote it. I think I know, but I don't want to misattribute. And the article was real short. I want to say, like, 500 words. And it was just, can art be games? That was just the title of it, right? And it was just like, let me just very seriously, almost like in a satirical, like, Jonathan Swift kind of way, being like, is it possible for art to ever be games? By holding games up as better than art, right? And just like dismantling that sort of concept, right? And that's one of those things when I think about language. It's not really, they're not inventing a new word. Door Problem doesn't invent a new word. Can art be games is not inventing a new word or a new concept. But it's kind of distilling a thing that it's now a mental shorthand that I use and I recall when I'm in other situations where I'm like, something about this topic is coming up, and then I'll get that strike of like, oh, remember, can art be games? And I'm like, okay, yeah, no, I can recenter myself in this conversation that can be muddy, or in this feeling that can be muddy. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything, a few years back we talked about you maybe like doing an update to the door problem a little bit, like, but is there anything you think, if we're going strictly on the language of like this document, this blog, this dashed off blog is a quick way to help people explain game design. Do you think there's anything interesting you've picked up in the years since then? Whether it's just job titles, like, oh, now somebody has to like, oh geez, I can't even think of an example. I'm going to move on fast. Like, it could just be new job titles that you would build around the door. It could be like, things we've learned about making doors in games that have changed, like added a new role that someone's concerned about.
Nothing.
You've learned nothing?
I have learned nothing. I have now been promoted to a spot where I never have to make a door again.
Yes. Yes.
But I am in meetings where people start discussing doors, and everybody sees my face, and there's no way I can hide it. I probably wouldn't do an update to the door problem. Like, I think it just stands well on its own, and I think other people have written stuff about it that like they can supplement how they would. But if I was looking at like generally less about door problem and more about explainers in the industry, one of the ones that's on my mind a lot is sort of like, it's on my mind now. I just alluded to it as like, I have now been promoted to a point where I'm no longer making doors, and people on my team are making doors, and I'm a prover, right? Is how over time my perspective and the problems I'm solving have changed as I've gone from, say, a junior designer who is entirely in the tools and also working on a very specific, I want to say small feature, but the first game I shipped was Scribblenauts, so that was not a small feature set. But like junior designer, and how it feels to move from junior to mid to senior to like in a leadership capacity, and now I'm design director, and it's very weird. But like seeing how I'm very, I think I am. Maybe I'm not, but I think I'm very introspective, and I spend a lot of time thinking about how I think about things, and like how I work now is distinctly different than how I worked as a junior. Not just because the tasks I'm doing are different, but the way I'm thinking about work and what kinds of challenges I am tackling, and instinctively what kind of stuff, like how I am solving those problems, from a sort of like smaller, more constrained look as a junior designer, where it's like, I own this small slice of the game, and I'm going to be its caretaker till ship. And I'll do everything I can for the small slice, to, all right, now I own a bunch of systems that interact with a bunch of other people. I am now doing a lot of communication across designers, and like we're doing a lot more handoffs than I had in the past, to like more senior level where I'm starting to think about like long-term scope, where I'm trying to be like, are we going to be able to finish this in time? Can I make documentation that has like the minimum scope versus the maximum, and like coordinating a lot of that, when to say yes, when to say no, because I'm thinking about the downstream effects of a design decision on all the other team's members that then have to make that a reality because I thought it would be cool to add doors into a game, and then look at what you did. And on and on and on, right? Like your perspective changes, your field of view changes, and not always like, I'm not going to be like, it's better to think in those sort of ways. It's like the work is distinctly different. And so if I ever did, like, I think that's the area that when I think about doing explainers, I think about that. And that like perspective shift over time as you get into more levels of seniority.
Yeah, going beyond like it's almost like you might say like a junior or a mid-level designer is the one who has to, attack the door from all those angles. But then even at that level, there's value in beginning to go, okay, what is the long-term effect of my decision to do this here? And therefore what I'm doing here isn't just like, gravity, like, we'll set gravity at a number. It's, does setting gravity at a number affect, if it's a shooter, does it affect bullet drop or something? Like, does my door needing to work this way mess someone's life over there? It sounds like that's what you're describing. Like, it's slowly beginning to look at not just at the doors, what you do, but what you do with other people, I guess.
Probably the way I think about, if I were to use the door metaphor for this, and I don't know if I would, because I think at some point it falls apart when you get out of the the implementation stage and into the project standing stage. But around the time I wrote the door problem, I was also working on a 4-player co-op cover shooter / stealth game called Fuse that no one has played. It's one of Insomniac's games. It was a learning experience in a lot of ways. I'm really proud of the work that we did. Yeah. It's not a great game. It's fine. But like one of the things that we had to do was, because it's a co-op game and you are going through a linear series of like arenas or levels, right? Like it is a very linear experience, right? Like come across these combat setups, solve some puzzles, deal with some hazard or complication, and then we have to unload part of the level to load in the next, right? So we need airlocks. So an easy way to do airlocks, this is why doors suck so much, is to use a door, right? But to do that with a 4-player game, you can't have one player go through the door and trigger the next area without the other people lagging behind. So we had to make like doors that were like 4 players have to be in position and animate to open, like 4 like super soldier spies are needed to open this door. What kind of door is this? So I'd say like at a junior level, it's like I am, with the help of more senior people, determining where those airlocks need to be. And other people are helping because a lot of it has to do with how much can be fit on memory on disk, right? And I, as a junior designer, can't make those decisions, right? Like I need help from other people, but like I can help with doing the pacing, right? And I'm implementing the door to spec of like what someone else has defined, right? It's like, here are the set of doors you have here. Which one makes sense? I might be working with someone and implementing that particular 4-player door as opposed to a different particular 4-player door. Oh my God, we had a bunch of them. And they're wild. Like if you ever play the game, just pay attention to like the 4-player animated door opening crossover situations. But when you get to like a mid-level, it's like you mid or senior level, you might be the person who actually owns, here are how we do the co-op door airlocks. Here is the set we do. You work with the engineers, you work with the animators to create the palette, right? And then that gets spread out to the rest of the design team, right? So like other seniors and other mid and other junior designers will then use that work, but you are creating work that is then being used by the rest of the team. And like stepping out from there. And I think once you get to like a director level, I might be like, how are we going to handle these airlocks? Do we need to have airlocks? We're going to do 4-player airlocks. And then like as a director, I might assign one of the designers to say, hey, I won't tell them we need 4-player doors. What I will do is say, here's the problem space we have. We need to gather the players to make sure that you can unload areas. How do you want to handle it? Bring me a proposal, right? And we'll often discuss, here are some options we have, doors or teleporting, or it's always a door. It's always a door. I don't know. Thankfully, so many games have turned to open world that this is less of a problem, and we have beefier computers or beefier consoles, and we've made less linear games. But this was like a major problem in a number of games that I've made.
Yeah,
you get the idea.
For our listeners, about like loading and unloading levels, around this time, around like a shortly. You and your former Insomniac colleague, Elon Ruskin, I think I'm saying his name right, were giving a bunch of talks about this topic around this Sunset Overdrive, and then he was giving ones about Spider-Man later. Like, Elon Ruskin's like given some amazing talks about this concept that like, I am not a programmer. I did not understand a lot of what was going in there, but just his dedication to like spelling out every detail was just like admirable about how this central problem animates so much of the work, and it's deep down there. And like, like I said earlier about, like purple, the cost of making purple, well, the cost of making a good level sometimes is like, memory allocation. And then he was like so deep in the weeds on it that like, it's cool that it's out there and that, people can learn from it.
One of the formative, just to add to this, like one of the formative experience I had as an associate designer, which is a junior designer, when I worked at Insomniac, was I took over a bunch of content from another designer on Resistance 3. And this was like a year before ship. So I was only working on the game for a year. I was caretaking and taking stuff from alpha to shipped, basically. And in some cases doing some like major changes. But one of the formative experiences is that there was a whole scene, and this will be good for the younger game devs who never have to deal with this, and they're in a much more blessed scenario. But I remember we had a whole situation in there where like you have a whole like combat approach through like broken down apartment complex kind of thing, and you're coming down off of this approach fighting alien enemies, and then you get to the pub, and then you have to do a standoff at the pub while the aliens are now coming down that same broken down apartment structure and stuff, coming to you, and you're trying to snipe them from a distance and defend the pub. And I remember that we were out of budget for that space, right? There was an airlock just before it. There's literally a hatch you go down and an airlock right after it where you go into a sewer. We were out of memory. And so we had to find assets to delete. And I remember having a memory report of exactly every single asset and how much memory it took. And I remember the last thing I deleted in order to put us within memory was a toilet seat. Because there was only one instance of that asset. It was hidden within rubble. It wasn't needed to be loaded. And so I found it, and that's the one item that got us within memory was a toilet seat. I'll never forget it, because I'm like, okay, I've learned a lesson here about the technical constraints that are on design. And I think a lot of people would be like, I'd hate to have to do that. I'm like, no, I actually quite enjoy that, right? There's something about this technical problem solving at that level that I really do enjoy. Yeah. And I'm glad that I haven't had to deal with that level of detail oriented optimization in a really long time.
I was gonna I was in danger of just rolling off from that conversation, but time is finite. And as we wind down our time here, because you have to go make cool games and I have to go write about them and then maybe work on some of my own. I like using some time here at the end of the podcast to give folks a chance to shout out someone else they work with. Recently, it's been folks at their company. Basically, I think, especially in a social media age, where some of us have to build our careers or communities off of what we post online, it can be hard to remember that there's folks who don't get as much, either they don't get much time in the limelight, they don't want as much time in the limelight, but they are great people to work with and such, and we don't get to sort of hear about them as much. So is there anyone in your life, could be your current company, past company, who you're like, man, I really enjoyed working with this person? Is there anyone you want to give a shout out to like that, who sort of doesn't get the time in the sun that, you and I keep finding ourselves in?
Answer, because I'm I always want people's permission before putting them on blast, right? And which is fine. Let me think for a minute, because there's some people that come to mind immediately because they're very formative for me, and they might not know that they were very formative people for me when I was in games and when I was a baby designer, right? I'd probably say one of the people, and I don't know if he needs the limelight or not, but one of the people that had a big impact on me was Drew Murray. He was when I was at Insomniac, he was our lead designer on Resistance 3. He was game director or creative director on Sunset Overdrive. They're really two people, and they had one brain, two people, and so they traded off that role as well. Mm-hmm. And working with him, one of the things I always think about when I started going into leadership roles was I would ask myself, what kind of leadership did I enjoy when I was more junior in the industry? And I would always go back to Drew, because he had this tendency to be, he was always very thoughtful, right? I would go to him and be like, hey, I want to propose a major change. And he would listen to me, and then he'd say, all right, let's talk on Thursday. He'd say, sometime in the future, let's talk about this at that time. And then he would set up a meeting, and then we'd sit down, and he'd say yes, or he'd say no. And then I'd ask him why, and he'd give me a very thoughtful answer. And it's a very simple thing, but I think about it a lot because there's a lot of in games, and I think this is also a human thing and not just a games thing, is that people value people who make quick decisions. I can make a quick decision. I'm very effective. I can make it in a showy way. I can make it in the middle of a meeting. Then you get a lot of people who are directors or leads who sort of fire off the hip, and often make bad decisions, right? Or they're too confident in a thing, and they're not being thoughtful about what they're doing, right? They don't have all the information before they're making a decision, but they're used to making the decision very fast, and their job is to make decisions quickly, right? Now, I do want to say I am a big fan of a good decision-making process. I like to make decisions. Sometimes, though, it's like, when do we have to make this decision is important to know. And it might be in this meeting, or it might be by the end of this week. And that can give you time to determine like how much information you need to collect, or how much time you have to collect information to make a good decision. But I think about that with Drew because when I knew that anything that I was proposing or anything that I was talking to him about as a designer was being thought through carefully, and that he would be able to articulate to me why or why not, right? Sometimes there's good ideas that are bad for the project. Sometimes it's just scope issues. Sometimes it's like, let's unpick this from a design point of view, and here's the ways it's going to have downstream effects on other things. And I just appreciated that he'd be able to sit there and explain it back to me. And I knew that I was being listened to, and that I knew that like I could accept and I could buy into no's, right? And I wouldn't like develop a like, oh, it's them against me, and they are just putting down the designer. And I say that kind of mockingly, but like that is the mood sometimes at companies. I have been in those sort of situations on both sides of this, right? And so yeah, like Drew's someone that I think about a lot when I think about what it means to be a good leader in design, and be a careful leader, and be like a very attentive person, a very thoughtful person. And so I tried to model those behaviors. So yeah,
that's a wonderful answer. Just like, I really love hearing not just, about someone who meant something to you, but so like sort of being able to pin down, something about how we interact with each other. I think we've talked a few times about like in this podcast about like how we communicate with each other and learn from each other. And like that Drew was able to offer that, it's just nice to hear. Yeah. Liz, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope our listeners got a lot out of this. I know I did. If folks want to send you more questions about the door problem, or just or your awful book system, where should they send them?
I have an email. You can just use my email. It's lizengland07@gmail.com. The 7 is random. It doesn't have any meaning because someone named Liz England already had a Gmail account. But yeah, you can just email me. That's fine. I have a response rate of like 50% because I'll read an email and be like, I don't feel like responding to this. And then it will escape my consciousness, and it'll be like, it'll be like it never existed to me. Yeah. But I try to be better about that. But that's where you can contact me. That's probably the best place to contact me. Yeah.
Very good. All right, Liz, thanks for your time today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
There you have it. For what it's worth, Liz's bookshelves look great. But at what cost? You can read the Door Problem blog on Game Developer or on Liz's blog at lizengland.com. I'll drop links in the show notes. For more from us at Game Developer, be sure to visit www.gamedeveloper.com, follow us on major social platforms, and subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find me on Blue Sky at brianfrancis.me. Today's episode was edited by Pierre Landriau, and our theme music is by Mike Meehan. Thanks for joining us. Oh, and there's one more very, very important lesson you should take away from today's episode. More money means door problems. See you around.